The tiny plastic nodule resting on your seatbelt isn't there for aesthetics, it isn't a factory defect, and it certainly isn't there to reinforce the fabric. It is a highly specific strap positioning tool engineered to ensure the restraint system functions flawlessly against your unique frame. And if you have ignored it your entire life, there is a very high chance the seatbelt strapped across your chest right now will fail to shield you properly in a sudden crash. I am not overstating this. This is the exact conclusion drawn by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration when they examined the physical trauma of victims who were wearing their seatbelts during an accident but had them resting in the wrong spot. The little button is the answer to that fatal flaw, but it is just one piece of a much larger puzzle. Within the standard seatbelt assembly of any modern vehicle produced over the past 2 decades, there are multiple hidden mechanisms that the average driver is completely blind to. These internal systems are entirely reliant on the belt sitting precisely where it belongs. If the geometry is off, these hidden safeguards become completely ineffective, or worse, they become the cause of the injury. Over the next few minutes, I will break down exactly what that little plastic stud is meant to do, the reason automotive engineers designed it that way, the hidden technology coiled inside your car's pillars that no salesperson ever mentioned, and the terrifying statistics from recent crash data regarding the high volume of severe injuries caused simply by wearing a seatbelt incorrectly. That final statistic is exactly why I am making this presentation. We need to begin with the plastic clip itself, because grasping its true purpose is the key to understanding the rest of the systems we are going to cover. Engineers call it a strap guide or a belt positioning clip. It is permanently anchored to the fabric at a very specific mathematical coordinate, and its entire job is to route the diagonal strap securely across your sternum, keeping it far away from your throat if you happen to be shorter than the mathematical average the restraint was originally modeled against. The familiar 3-point seatbelt was brought to life by Niels Bohlin at Volvo back in 1959. Since its inception, Volvo estimated in 2009 that this single invention has preserved over 1 million human lives. Bohlin's creation was nothing short of a mechanical triumph. Prior to his work, cars relied on lap straps, which notoriously generated their own unique subset of catastrophic abdominal trauma during head-on collisions. The 3-point harness fixed this. By implementing a diagonal design, the violent kinetic energy of a crash is spread simultaneously across the sturdy bones of the pelvis, chest, and shoulder. This prevents the devastating force from localizing on one weak point of the body. To this day, it remains arguably the greatest passive safety mechanism ever integrated into modern transit. But Bohlin drafted his blueprints around the bodily dimensions of the average European male, sitting at roughly 5 feet, 9 inches tall. By doing so, he unintentionally baked a physical limitation into the hardware, one that would take the automotive industry decades to properly correct. When someone who stands at 5 feet 2 inches slides into the driver's seat and pulls the buckle across their body, that diagonal strap naturally climbs up toward their throat instead of planting firmly across the middle of their chest. Because the upper anchor was placed with a taller person in mind, the angle forces the strap far too high on a shorter torso. If a belt is pinned against your windpipe instead of your ribcage, it is completely incapable of transferring the kinetic shock wave into your collarbone and sternum. Instead, it unleashes all of that violent energy directly into your trachea and cervical spine. What happens next during a real-world crash is not just a theory. Back in 1987, engineering teams documented that a massive percentage of chest and neck trauma suffered by shorter drivers in simulated crashes was caused entirely by the poor placement of that diagonal strap, not because the seatbelt itself had broken. The hardware was doing exactly what it was built to do. The overarching issue was that the original blueprint failed to accommodate the vast spectrum of human heights and body types. The little plastic nodule is the physical remedy to this anatomical mismatch. By sliding the webbing through this guide, you can manipulate the angle of the strap so it bisects the space between your shoulder and your chest, staying completely clear of your throat. Once set, the button locks that critical geometry in place for the duration of your drive. It is not some trivial luxury feature. It is a highly efficient, mass-produced fix to a mathematical oversight that certain auto manufacturers realized they needed to solve, back when many other car makers were still treating poor seatbelt placement as the driver's responsibility instead of an engineering hurdle. A massive portion of the population has had this tiny feature sitting right next to their shoulder for decades without a clue of its importance. As a result, they leave it unused, driving around with a compromised safety net that actively undermines the very protection it was built to guarantee. But adjusting this strap isn't just about stopping the belt from chafing your neck or making a minor comfort adjustment. It is the mandatory prerequisite required to unlock the true life-saving potential of two hidden mechanisms coiled up inside the walls of your car. Inside the belt retractor, which is hidden within the B-pillar where the belt anchors to the frame of the car, there are two sophisticated systems designed to fire in a very specific sequence during a crash. The first mechanism is known as a pretensioner. The second is the load limiter. These two components operate as a highly calibrated duo, and both of them require the strap to be resting on the correct anatomical landmarks of your body in order to function properly. Grasping how each piece works individually, and then seeing how they complement each other, will completely alter your understanding of what a seatbelt actually does. The pretensioner is the mechanism that, within the very first milliseconds of a collision being registered by the car's sensors, violently reels in between 4 and 6 inches of slack from the belt. The trigger for this action comes from the exact same network of accelerometers responsible for deploying the airbags. When these sensors detect a rapid loss of speed that indicates a severe impact, usually within the initial 15 to 30 milliseconds of the event, they transmit an electrical pulse to a tiny explosive charge housed within the retractor unit. This charge detonates, forcing a piston or a specialized spool to rapidly wind the belt inward by a mathematically predetermined length, all before the occupant has even started to lurch forward in their seat. The entire goal here is to eliminate the inherent looseness found in any normally fastened seatbelt. This ensures that the moment the body is thrown forward by inertia, the belt is already pulled tight against them, providing instant restraint. It doesn't waste precious milliseconds reeling in loose fabric before it starts doing its job. If the belt is loose, either because it is positioned poorly or simply worn carelessly, the pretensioner ends up wasting its energy pulling in slack instead of securing the driver's body. That means exactly when the body requires maximum restraint. The mechanism is still tightening the belt instead of halting the occupant's forward momentum. In controlled studies released by the IIHS in 2019, researchers found that a belt with just 2 inches of slack allowed a driver's head to travel 3 inches further forward during a crash compared to a properly tensioned belt. In a high-speed collision, those 3 inches dictate whether you walk away with minor bruising or whether your face impacts the airbag at a dangerous off-center angle. This specific scenario is a well-documented cause of severe facial and orbital bone fractures in crashes that were otherwise highly survivable. The pretensioner also solves a mystery regarding normal seatbelt behavior that everyone has experienced but few actually understand. When you yank the belt too fast while trying to buckle up, it temporarily jams before releasing again. That is the internal inertial sensor registering a sudden spike in the belt's speed and locking the mechanism in response. It relies on the exact same fundamental sensor technology that triggers the explosive pretensioner during a wreck, just operating at a vastly lower threshold of force and time. During your daily commute, it is just a minor annoyance when you lean forward to grab something from the passenger seat. But during a violent collision, that exact same principle is what stops the belt from unspooling further as you are thrown forward by the immense forces of the crash. Both actions, the annoying daily lockup and the explosive emergency tightening, are just different manifestations of the same core mechanism. One is slightly inconvenient, the other is the only thing preventing your ribcage from colliding with the steering column. The load limiter engages immediately after the pretensioner, and its purpose is often the hardest to wrap your head around. Its entire job is to intentionally allow the belt to loosen in a controlled manner right at the exact moment you would assume it should be gripping you as tightly as humanly possible. After the pretensioner has violently cinched the belt tight and the occupant's forward movement is halted, the engineers faced a secondary dilemma. If the belt remains completely rigid at maximum tension during the peak forces of the crash, the immense pressure applied to the chest cavity can cause catastrophic injuries on its own. The sheer force of the collision, concentrated entirely along the narrow 2-inch strip of fabric pulled tight across the chest, is more than enough to shatter ribs and inflict severe bruising or tearing to the internal organs beneath if the tension isn't managed properly. Safety specialists catalog this phenomenon as belt-induced injury. It became a heavily researched issue throughout the 70s and 80s as explosive pretensioners became standard equipment, creating far greater restraining forces than the older, purely mechanical belts. The load limiter is the brilliant engineering solution to this dangerous side effect. It is a purely mechanical failsafe, containing zero electronics. Most often it utilizes a precisely calibrated torsion bar or a section of specialized webbing engineered to stretch predictably. Its purpose is to allow the belt to give way just a little bit, feeding out a controlled length of extra slack the instant the pressure crushing the chest surpasses a specific safety limit, usually hovering between 900 and 1,350 pounds of force, depending on the car's design and the occupant weight class the hardware was tuned for. The belt does not completely let go. It doesn't release the passenger. What it does is stretch the duration of the impact out over a fraction of a second longer, gradually feeding out more webbing to alleviate the crushing pressure on the ribs and sternum, all while keeping the occupant safely pinned in their seat. Data compiled by Euro NCAP regarding European cars between 2015 and 2020 showed that combining a properly tuned pretensioner with a load limiter lowered the risk of severe chest injuries by 23% across all simulated crash scenarios when compared to older systems that only utilized a pretensioner. Now, this brings us right back to how that little plastic button dictates the success of both these hidden systems. If the diagonal strap is riding up near the neck because the driver is shorter and ignored the positioning clip, the pretensioner will violently cinch the webbing directly across the throat instead of the solid bones of the chest and shoulder. That explosive tightening, engineered specifically to halt the heavy mass of the torso, is instead unleashed upon the fragile structures of the windpipe and cervical spine. Subsequently, the load limiter will begin feeding out slack based on pressure applied to a part of the body that was never meant to handle that kind of load. Both mechanisms will trigger in the exact right order and at the precise tension limits they were programmed for. But because the fabric is resting on the wrong anatomical structures, the resulting injuries will be drastically different from what the engineers modeled in their simulations. This is the exact, unarguable mechanical reason why where your seatbelt sits is so crucial. It is not just about making the drive more comfortable, it is the fundamental requirement for a complex safety net involving explosive charges, calibrated metal deformation, and split-second timing to function without killing you. That little plastic button is the crucial bridge connecting your unique physical dimensions to that intricate hidden system. The B-pillar height adjuster is the third critical element of the system that remains largely ignored by most drivers, and it is actually the setting you should adjust before you even touch the positioning clip. In almost every car built since the mid-90s, there is a sliding mechanism or a push button located on the B-pillar, the vertical post between the front and rear doors, that allows you to move the belt's upper anchor point up or down by several inches. Manufacturers include this feature because the perfect starting point for the belt varies wildly depending on how tall the driver is. The positioning clip on the strap itself cannot fully compensate for an anchor point that is radically misaligned with your body. According to NHTSA safety protocols and the official owner's manuals for brands like Toyota and Honda, the ideal setting is the one where the diagonal strap crosses precisely over the center of your collarbone. It should not be creeping up toward your throat, nor should it be teetering on the very edge of your shoulder. If that anchor point is set too high for your frame, the geometry of the belt will naturally pull the strap toward your neck, even if you are using the positioning clip correctly. Conversely, if it is set too low, the strap can slide off your shoulder during a collision, completely neutralizing the restraint's ability to hold your torso back. The correct sequence is to slide that B-pillar anchor to the right height first until the belt is centered on your collarbone. Only once that is set should you use the plastic positioning clip for the final fine-tuning across your chest. If you do it in reverse, moving the anchor afterward will change the tension and angle of the clip, forcing you to start over. For most people, that anchor stays exactly where the previous owner or the factory worker left it, which is usually calibrated for a person of perfectly average height. If you fall significantly above or below that median, the default setting is systematically wrong for every single mile you drive. Then there is the fourth element, which is the most frequently ignored part of daily belt use because it requires active attention every time you buckle up, the position of the lap belt. This horizontal strap must rest firmly against your hip bones, specifically the iliac crests. These are the rugged, bony ridges of your pelvis that are biologically built to withstand the massive loads exerted during a head-on collision. It must never sit across the soft tissue of your midsection or your stomach. The reason for this is as simple as it is grim. When the lap belt is resting over your abdomen during a crash, that immense force is applied directly to your internal organs rather than your skeletal structure. This creates a specific, well-documented clinical injury pattern known as seatbelt syndrome. In trauma centers, this is a recognized condition where the pancreas, small intestines, and mesentery are crushed, often accompanied by fractures in the lower spine as the belt acts as a rigid fulcrum over the soft gut. The most common reason a lap belt ends up over the stomach instead of the hips is the angle of the car seat. When you recline your seat back significantly beyond the manufacturer's recommendation, often done for comfort on long trips, it shifts the belt's geometry, pulling the lap portion upward toward your waist. Toyota's technical manuals from the last 15 years explicitly state that the seat back should be kept within 25 degrees of vertical for the safety systems to work. A 45-degree recline can shift the belt 3 to 5 inches higher than intended, which is enough to move it completely off the protective hip bones for most people. Finally, there is a fifth factor, the overall tightness of the strap. Even a perfectly positioned belt is useless if it is worn with significant slack. Some drivers find a snug belt annoying and pull out extra webbing to make it looser, but this directly sabotages the Pretensioner. Beyond the high-speed physics, it also ruins the belt's performance in moderate impacts, the kind that aren't quite violent enough to blow the explosive charges but are still strong enough to cause whiplash. You can perform a quick practical test right now. Once you are buckled in and have adjusted your anchor and clip, you shouldn't be able to slide more than 2 or 3 fingers between the strap and your chest. If you can fit your whole hand in there, it is too loose. You need to pull the diagonal strap toward the buckle until the slack is gone and the belt is in firm contact with your body. All of this leads to one obvious question. Why didn't the person who sold you the car explain any of this? It isn't a conspiracy. It's a combination of time pressure during the sales process and the assumption that seatbelts are common knowledge. The car has a warning light to tell you to click the buckle, but it has no sensors to detect if the geometry is wrong or if the lap belt is crushing your organs. The car assumes that once it hears that click, you've done your part correctly. The data says otherwise. In a 2020 NHTSA analysis of 3,000 serious accidents where occupants were confirmed to be wearing their belts, nearly a third of the cases involved injuries made worse by poor belt positioning. Not a belt failure and not a lack of a belt. Just a belt worn incorrectly. To ensure you are actually getting the protection you paid for, let's condense everything into a simple 15-second routine. This isn't something you need to do every time you buckle up, just once to set your baseline or whenever someone else has been driving your car. Step 1. Sit in your natural driving position and ensure the seat back is tilted between 25 and 30 degrees from vertical. If you usually drive with a heavy recline, bring it forward for this adjustment. You can decide later if that extra lean is worth the safety compromise. Step 2. Adjust the B-pillar anchor height. Slide the lever until the diagonal strap crosses the exact center of your collarbone without grazing your neck. It's easiest to do this while unbuckled, then click the belt in to verify. If the strap hits your throat, slide the anchor down. If it's teetering off your shoulder, slide it up. Step 3. Check the lap belt. It must rest on your hip bones, not your abdomen. Press down with your hand to feel for the hard iliac crests underneath. If the belt is sitting on your soft stomach, pull it down and hold it there while you pull the shoulder strap to remove the slack. Step 4. If the shoulder strap is still too close to your neck after the anchor is set, slide the webbing into that plastic positioning clip. Adjust the clip until the strap is centered between your shoulder and your sternum. Step 5. Verify the tension. You should only be able to fit 2 or 3 fingers between the strap and your chest. If you can slide your whole hand in, the belt is too loose. Pull the diagonal strap toward the buckle until it is snug against your frame. It is also vital to understand the inherent boundaries of this technology. The 3-point belt is a masterpiece of engineering for frontal and angled impacts, the types of crashes that account for 57% of all road casualties. In those moments, it is the most effective safety device in the car. In a side impact, the belt acts as a secondary anchor to keep you in place so the side airbags can do their job. In a rollover, it is the primary defense against being thrown from the vehicle, which is the leading cause of death in those accidents. But in a rear-end collision, the belt plays a minor role. Your headrest and the seat's internal structure are your primary shields. Keep in mind that the positioning clip is not a substitute for a booster seat. If an occupant is too small to achieve a safe belt line over the collarbone, even with the anchor and clip at their lowest settings, the adult system is simply not designed for them. That tiny plastic button was placed there by engineers who looked at the data and saw that a huge portion of the population was at risk because of a simple geometry problem. It works alongside explosive charges and calibrated metal to save your life, but it only works if you are in the right position. These 5 steps take 15 seconds and require 0 tools. They are the difference between a system that works as intended and one that fails when you need it most. I have a question for the comments. Did the person who sold you your last car explain any of these adjustments when they handed you the keys? Yes or no? I want to see how much of this life-saving info is actually making it into the hands of drivers. If you find this kind of technical deep dive into your car's hidden systems helpful, I post a new analysis every week. Next time, we are breaking down ABS braking, specifically why the correct way to stop on snow or gravel is actually the exact opposite of what you've been taught to do on dry pavement. That video drops next week.